Welcome, everyone. I'm Arianna Trainito. I lead thought leadership and a sales team in higher education at Google, and I'm excited to host a conversation today on investing in education technology to better business outcomes. I have three partners in crime for our chat, so let me start with a brief introduction for all of them. First, my Google Cloud colleague, Stephen Butschi. Stephen leads the Google Cloud education team, which works with school districts, colleges, and education technology companies to adopt cloud computing products. During his 11 years at Google, he has worked across several products used in the education industry, including Google Workspace, Chromebooks, and the Google Cloud Platform. Then we have two friends from BCG who we have partnered with earlier this year on the research and the insights that will be the base for the conversation and the discussion today. I'll start with Ernesto. Ernesto Pagano is a managing director and a partner at BCG. He's a core member of the technology, media, and telecom and the public sector practices with a focus on strategy and transformation. He currently also leads BCG's learning and development work in Miami. And since joining BCG in 2010, Ernesto has advised clients on growth strategy, innovation, operating model transformation, and organizational design. And our third guest, also from BCG, is Pranay Ahlawat. Pranay is a partner and associate director at BCG and a core member of the technology, media, and telecom practice as well. He globally leads the product innovation and engineering topic in tech and focuses on enterprise software and cloud. So what we'll do today is discuss 5 provocative learnings from the research that we conducted and have a conversation with our guests on the implication for higher ed institutions. Before we discuss the 5 learning, let me set the stage on why discussing technology in our industry is so important. No matter what is the institution goal, whether it's bettering the student journey, reducing cost of ownership, or trying to accelerate your online presence, our survey found that 71% of higher ed leaders believe that technology is a high priority. And this prioritization really matters because, as you can see from the numbers on the right, those who view technology as a high priority, they also see 20% more financial strengths, 50% more higher job placement rates, and 30% more student enrollments. So with that in mind, let's deep dive into our first learning. So learning number 1, there is essentially a mismatch between self-assessed digital maturity and the actual capabilities. So 67% of leaders indicates that their institution would be considered a digital performer or a digital leader. Yet only 29% of those institutions are actually using data analytics to improve processes. And only 44% of those organizations say that they have moderate data integration. So let's start the conversation. And Pranay, I'd love to start from you. What is your assessment of where universities are in their digital transformation journey, and how does it compare to other industries?
Thanks, Arianna. So, in terms of spending, universities are about in line with the industry. So an average company spends between 3 to 8% of their revenues on IT. And education spends roughly about 5% of revenue. So they're very much in line. But in terms of digital maturity and business process maturity, they're a little bit behind. So, and we know that if you take a look at universities, I mean, they have a potential to do a lot better. So they're definitely behind knowledge-based industries and financial institutions, but a little bit ahead of labor-intensive industries like construction and mining and public sector. Now, I think what's more important, I think, from our learning is that there are 3 structural problems that are basically driving this. The first is there's a bunch of just industry level problems happening in education right now. Declining enrollments, rising operational costs. I think everybody here is well aware of this, and that actually makes a problem for universities when they're actually prioritizing IT spend. The second, and this was again very abundantly clear in our research, is a lot of the problems for universities are actually organizational. There is both resistance to change as well as a lack of IT talent that is actually keeping universities from progressing digitally. And the third is that if you take a look at the size of the education market, it's relatively small. So if you compare it to banking, for example, banking is about 8 times the size of education. And that has two implications. The first is, there's a lack of private capital flowing into education. And then the second thing that's happening is that if you take a look at, some larger tech companies, and obviously I think companies like Google and Salesforce are changing that. But if you take a look at the large companies, they are always, prioritizing other verticals instead of education. And I think all those three things put together are sort of keeping the universities a little bit behind.
That's great. It makes a lot of sense. And Stephen, turning over to you, given your specific focus on higher ed from the cloud perspective, what is your view on this gap between perception and reality of technological advancements, and perhaps your initial thoughts on what can be done?
Yes, Pranay, hopefully I'm here to convince you the other way, that Google is actually really focused on industry solutions. And I think that, to your point before, and I used to make this metaphor, and I think it's still apt, that purchasing Google Cloud was like walking into Lowe's. There's 1,000 widgets. But now we're starting to see that we have these aisles. We've got this education aisle where there's more pre-built solutions based on what people need today. And what is interesting, and I agree with you, that higher ed is traditionally slow to change. And it's ironic because we've been working with a lot of researchers doing groundbreaking research, for example, at Harvard, taking the first picture of the black hole. But yet, in many respects, you look at a campus and you think, where else do they have a bursar's office? Like, I've never gone to, a bank and heard about a bursar's office. And so there's so many interesting components of how to change institutions and transform when there's so much history and so much legacy. But what I think has happened during the pandemic is people are realizing that there are opportunities to change, from going to in-person classes to overnight having to, and we're hearing from provosts, people that never used their learning management system to using it overnight for all their classes is a big shift. And so I think there's a bit of momentum that's building. And I have not had as many conversations with university presidents and provosts around digital transformation as I have this past year. That said, while many people want to transform, there are a lot of issues in terms of, and things that make it difficult. So for example, we know that data is really, it's siloed, it's dirty. We need to make sure there's the right access controls, but that's where we've been seeing that universities are starting to make some good progress there. And we've been here to help. We recognize that, in order to use the full capabilities of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and to see the benefits of cloud computing, that you need to have really good data and clean data. We also recognize that many institutions are they're not a new institution in themselves. They've got hundreds of years of history. And so we need to also recognize them and recognize where they're coming from, and that a lot of these institutions are hybrid environments where they're using on-premise, multiple clouds. So that's also we've been focusing, is how can we help with things like Anthos to bridge their different systems. A couple examples that I'll leave you with on this question. The first one is we're working with a consortium of about 20 universities called Unison. And they've built this Unison data platform to help with this issue of data and how to clean it and organize it and bring it in from different education technology tools like learning management systems. And it's been really successful. There's just an article in EDUCAUSE about University of Michigan using their data platform on Unison to help students understand what are the top resources that are being used in my class? How am I comparing against other students in my class, and help them use that data to better inform their learning process. Another example is we just did a blog post with UCLA on deploying Apogee, which is an API management system. And that's also just getting their systems to talk to each other, democratize the ability to build on top of these systems and use data has been really helpful as part of their digital transformation process. So there's some great examples out there. I know we'll get into some more, but I think if people focus on how to use their data effectively, they'll be in a good spot.
That's great. And that's actually a good segue into our learning number 2 that tries to dig a little bit deeper on what are the areas with the most opportunity for technology improvement. And you see the top 3 here on this chart are student retention, student engagement, and student recruitment and application. So I'd love to hear from you, Ernesto. Can you explain, can you give us a sense with what we mean with technology improvement across the student journey and what you have observed supporting many clients in this space?
Sure, of course. So I think we need to start from the fact that today most universities don't leverage data to improve the student experience from the first touch point through when they become alumni. And the universities that do use data and digital engagement tools do that in a solid way that reflects the way they're organized. So we have a strong belief that there is a lot of value that can be unlocked by developing a 360-degree view of the student with the data all in one place. And what does that mean? This allows for a better understanding of each student and the ability to perform analytics at scale. For example, so today, many universities are doing manual work around calculating the effectiveness of marketing. What type of student profile fits better with the program? What kind of student retention policies work better? And also the way universities engage with students is basically the same for everyone. So there is very little personalization that is happening today from the universities. Some digital tools personalize their tools better, but universities don't do much to personalize what type of content is offered to students, what type of format, and so on. And the other problem with this approach is that the analysis is very cumbersome to do. So when this analysis is done on a one-off basis. So it's not frequent, it's not continuous, and the person doing it may be changing. So you also lose the learning from the prior analysis. Now, in a world where the data is linked and easy to access and manipulate, you can envision this to be a frequent exercise that does not require a lot of manual intervention, with significant savings on the activity, on the time it takes to do it and the number of hours required to do it, but also increase effectiveness because you can spot trends in a better way. And you can also learn from the past more easily. So imagine a world where you can identify the traits of the students that perform better, or you can target students in a much more effective way. And you can adjust your programs also based on what works and what doesn't work. So today, this is not happening. The outcome, as I said, will be much lower cost to attract students and serve them, better quality of instruction, and better student experience. And this is what the students are used to because they engage with other companies and other institutions that are much more digital, much more personalized. So universities are falling behind, and it's time for them to adapt to the new time and to the new generation of students. Data is being used at scale in other industries, except for higher ed, and it's time to change that. The data exists, it's just difficult to access and analyze at scale on a continuous basis. This can be changed. Other industries have done it, and they've done it with their customers, and universities can do that too.
That makes a lot of sense, and definitely from the marketing perspective that I'm more exposed to, I see a lot of this conversation happening. I'm curious, Stephen, from your perspective, more from the cloud side, what are some examples of projects that you've worked with that have addressed these areas?
Yeah, and I really love that idea of thinking about the student life cycle. So all the way from, we've got some universities and partnering with your team, Arianna, on how do we help those find what students would be great fits for their university and double down on those students who are probably in the middle of debating whether or not this is the best fit, and they can maximize their admissions office's time on spending time with those students to, once they're there, how do we ensure that they feel included and that they can progress and that they feel like they're part of the community, and then from there helping them find jobs, and then from there becoming alumni that give back to the university. And so it's a really good continuum that I like, and I think that the key underpinning of that is using analytics. And a few where we've seen some really great progress here, both across K-12 and universities. One, and there's just an article about this in the Dallas Morning News, is a K-12 district called Mesquite. And they've been using analytics to better personalize learning and figure out what their students' passions, because they realize if they're engaging them and someone's really passionate about cars, how can they adjust curriculum to make sure that then, when they're teaching about math, it has some sort of car element, and that way then the students are more likely to continue. Another way that we've been working is how can we find data and collect it across different mechanisms and different platforms to better spot learners who may be at risk and provide more proactive engagement. Ivy Tech has done a great job in this space where they've been using a whole bunch of different inputs to understand student behavior. And within about 2 weeks of a class starting, they can predict, I believe it's around 83% likelihood of whether or not that student is going to be at risk of dropping out. And the nice thing is, what's important there is proactive, and it's not reactive. They can then go and say, hey, we noticed that you're not super engaged, or we just want to check in with you. And maybe for one student, it might be that they got in a car accident. They don't have a way to get to school, so they can help line them up with ride shares or whatever it may be. But that's sort of using the data to help inform them. They're using TensorFlow on top of that, machine learning and analytics to spot those students at risk. But speaking of artificial intelligence, there's so many other ways that we're seeing people engage with this and starting that digital transformation. Another one that I'll call out is Penn State World's campus is using AI to bolster their academic advising. So helping students get answers to questions on what classes they should be taking, how are they preparing to get their degree, where there might be gaps, and then they can use that AI to help them also triage cases. So those, where the chatbot can't assist, they can help free up time of those admission and guidance counselors to dig deeper into those case studies. So those are just a few, but it's really exciting. I mean, we announced a couple of months ago a partnership with the University of Minnesota, and they're rethinking the whole medical experience. They're finding that there's not enough folks graduating with medical degrees to fill all the jobs that need Minnesota. And so they're thinking about how they're using Google Cloud and all the widgets below to do gamification, to inject machine learning and analytics into that experience to better improve that student learning process, but also help them find jobs as they graduate. So really exciting to see these processes that are coming about. And you're seeing that they're starting in different areas, whether it's admissions, whether it's academic advising, whether it's in the career center. There's so many different ways to get into it.
That's great. I love those examples. They really bring to life what the possibilities are. And, they bring you to show this learning number 3 that, as I mentioned, is closely related to my area of expertise, that is marketing. But when we think of using current or former student data to market more effectively, the vast majority, 60% of leaders think that it is a top priority. But the reality is that only 10% is leveraging this type of data to a large extent. And this is definitely near and close to my heart as we engage with clients to better their outcomes from marketing. And I'm really curious, Pranay, based on your experience, what is difficult about student data, and why is, again, this gap between perception and reality so pronounced?
No, for sure. And by the way, some of these themes, I think, Steve, you already touched on. But I think it comes down to 3 core reasons, and some of them are very sort of education specific. The first, like was mentioned before, if you take a look at the data that you need to actually deliver on these use cases that were being talked about, they're actually sitting in siloed and fragmented systems. So there is, systems of engagement like CRM, LMS. There are systems of record like SIS, and you have to get data from one system to the other, or data collectively in some kind of a data warehouse to basically make sense of that data effectively. The second is that there aren't clearly defined standards to help with interoperability. So, I mean, a good example here is like the open banking standard or the HL7 standard in healthcare. I think in education there are certain standards, but and it's great to hear that there are consortiums that are emerging to basically help with this problem as well. However, I don't think the standards are very strong, certainly not strong in a way that they basically standardize interoperability. And I think the third is that the systems that are holding the data are often traditional and legacy and on-premise architectures. They don't have APIs, they don't have real-time data integration capabilities. And in fact, some SIS vendors actually have a closed system approach to their data. So they don't even expose APIs. And that actually hurts both data integration as well as ISV innovation around that data. And I think if I were to take a big step back, I think the fragmented data, the fact that the systems don't talk to each other, the fact that there aren't any open standards, and the fact that some vendors actually have a closed system approach are all contributing to why universities are unable to leverage data effectively, in addition to the structural problems we talked about before.
That makes sense. And I'm going to jump to the next insight, because it's really a follow-up from you just discussed about the systems. And there is a stat that is not on the page. We know from this research that about 58% of higher ed institutions are centralizing at least some data on the cloud. However, and those are the numbers on the page, only 44% have moderate to advanced data integration. So the takeaway here is even when the structure to host the data is there, maybe nothing is happening really for that integration to really push along the strategy of an institution. And so, Stephen, from the practical side of implementing and having your team implement some of those projects, what is your take on data integration? Do you see the same that Pranay is observing? What are your thoughts?
I agree with Pranay that EDU institutions tend to suffer from a lot of data silos between departments, and so you can think about also the record, systems of record, but then also just the flow of a student. So you've got admissions data that's separated from registrars data, that's separated from learning data, that's separated from alumni data. So it is a disjointed experience. And I think there are three recommendations that I found in working with universities, and our team has found. One is creating a data governance policy of understanding how can we bring this together, who should have access to what, how do we, if we're struggling to bring some of it together, is there a way we can de-identify these, some of the data to make it more applicable or be able to share it better. But that's really important. The second then is start to look at tools. I'd mentioned Apogee earlier, where it was deployed at UCLA, and they've used that to sort of break down some of the workflow of these silos via API. So providing that right access controls, but at the same time allowing the campus to really start to use these systems and integrate them more effectively. And then the third area, and this is, I gave you a Lowe's metaphor before, so I'll give you another metaphor now. But I call it kind of nestifying the process. So if any of you have, for example, a Nest thermostat, and I have one, it's amazing. But it allows you to go and take your existing HVAC system and layer intelligence into it. So with the Nest thermostat, you can start to think about, now I can access it via my phone and can change the temperature before I get home, or it's going to recognize when I'm not home and turn it so it's more economical and better for the environment, or it's going to allow me to share access with other people. So the way I think about that as we look at EDU systems is how can we recognize, as I mentioned earlier, many people are in hybrid environments. They have stuff on-prem, they have stuff in multiple clouds. How can we think about adding that ML AI capability on top, or nestifying that experience without having to ripping out all those systems? And I think that's been really helpful as we've been thinking about digital transformation. As we look at that AI tutor, or the Penn State academic advising chatbot, that's a thing that we can layer on top, start to get more value, improve the user experience without having to rip everything out. And that's where I'd recommend people focus, are there easy wins that can help with your digital transformation. And then at some point, when you've got to rip out the whole system, you're doing a big gut renovation, then you can do that, but you're not waiting and putting everything on hold until you can do that.
Cool. Well, it seems like overall in the industry, there's a lot of awareness of the possibility, and also a lot of solutions, whether they're more radical or they build off an existing infrastructure leveraging machine learning, which is great to hear. And it brings me back to something that Pranay mentioned at the beginning, which I think it's really at the core of what needs to happen now, really, for the digital transformation to kickstart. And it's our last learning from this session. So, and it's about people and the barriers to implementing things like the ones we talked about. So 40% of leaders cite a lot of obstacles, so competing priorities, implementation costs, and resistance to change as barriers to tech adoption. And it's probably not surprising to anyone that a lot of decision makers are involved in this type of technology decisions. What is interesting here is that 76% of CTOs say that they will seek external help to improve tech capabilities. So they are aware that there are experts out there that can really help them transform and get the journey started. So Ernesto, I'll start with you, and then I'd love Pranay to hear from you as well. What is your experience from supporting clients on these type of journeys?
Sure. So first of all, I would say that there is a set of barriers to change that are common to every organization. And those are really what you have on the page, right? So high cost, competing priorities, meaning that what is urgent is prioritized over what is important. And people are afraid of change. People don't want to change habits. There is some aversion to risk and to the unknown. But this is common to every organization. The one that really resonates is implementation cost. And this is one that we hear a lot. Universities have a lot of tech debt, and doing an implementation of a new system, IT system, tech system, is a big investment. And we know that the budgets of universities are very constrained. So it's important that university take a long-term view, and there is a clear ROI for the investment, and that's often the case. But these barriers to resistance are true also to other organizations, and somehow other organizations are able to change, and universities are a bit behind, as we said. And there are some barriers that are specific to higher ed, and those are the ones that really fascinates me the most. The first one is lack of talent. And this is not surprising, because at the end of the day, if you think about what universities do and what they've grown up doing, they are great at research, they're great at teaching. They're not really great at implementing digital system and changing the IT infrastructure and so on. And it's also very difficult for universities to attract talent. So even some of our clients that are willing to hire the talent that they need, they find it very difficult. And it's not just a matter of money. It's a matter of brand. It's a matter of perception of being slow in changing. And for some talent, going to universities to embark into a digital transformation is a risky value proposition that might not lead them anywhere. So that's a very, very, very strong, very big barrier that is specific to higher ed and that we don't see in other industries. The other one that is also very specific to higher ed is the way decisions are made. And this is part of the academia's culture, but decisions are very collegial, very decentralized, and there is not really like one or two or three decision makers that top down set the vision and then make change happen. In academia, there is much more socialization that happens. There are more committees, more people need to be aligning on the path forward. And as you can imagine, this slows down things. It might also water down a little bit the impact of the change. And there are a lot of more barriers that come on the way because of many people not agreeing with the way things are done. So there is this culture of collectiveness and agreeing that it's a great thing, don't get me wrong. It's something that universities do need to protect, but makes change more difficult. And I think it calls for a higher need for somebody to manage the process and ensure that there is enough engagement. And maybe it takes a bit longer, but eventually it can be done. Just that it's a different way to get there. The other thing that is connected to it that is typical to universities is also how decentralized the power is. And this is something that also Pranay touched on. But what that means is that what we see, there is little incentive for different departments and schools to collaborate and to coordinate. So then what happens, you have a school that decides that they want to implement a new system, and they just go ahead and do it. And then there is a school that also wants to do something similar, but they decide to use a different vendor, a different partner, or they do it in a different way. And then it goes back to what Pranay was saying, which is then it makes it difficult to have one system that really, with data that talk to each other and easy to access data and so on. So this is very specific to higher ed. The last one that I would flag is around IT. So what we see is that IT usually is not at the table when these decisions are being made. Very often IT is seen as a support function and not a strategic function. And also the way they are incentivized is based on cost. The goal is to reduce cost, to manage cost, and not increase cost too much. As opposed to, for example, IT can be incentivized on student outcomes. Imagine how different would it be for the IT leader if now she or he has to be concerned about student retention as opposed to the cost of the new system that is being implemented. And this is very different when we do work with organizations. When we do digital transformation, IT is at the table. IT is a key decision maker, and they're bought into the vision, and their incentives are aligned with the incentives of everybody else. So I would say these are the barriers that are specific to higher ed that can be overcome. It's important to be aware of them and design a process that attacks them in a way that is customized for the higher ed world and for the specific culture and systems of the university. So there is no silver bullet, there is no one approach that works for everybody, but the barriers are very similar. And then how you handle them can be changed.
Yeah, I agree with everything Ernesto said. I'll probably leave our listeners with three thoughts. First, get the strategy right. I think it's often not simple, but it's important to understand what's important, what's urgent. Arianna, I think this was basically the big takeaway is that presidents need to be leaning in. They need to make this a strategic priority and put the funding behind it. That's one. The second is, and Steve, you touched on this, and I touched on this before as well, the technology landscape has changed. It's very different now than what it was even 5 years ago. There are vertical solutions, there are newer solutions to do integration and data management. So reevaluate your technology stack. Go have conversations with your vendors again, and actually chart a path to modernize those legacy systems. So I think that's number two. And then the third, look, we engage with a bunch of different clients along their transformation journeys. If you take a big step back, technology is only about 30% of the problem. 70% of the problem is still organization related. It is change management. It's actually updating business processes to leverage data better. And they have to address that challenge effectively. And for that, take help. Work with your vendors, work with consulting firms. I think it's often that type of change that actually holds an organization back. And it's important to address not just the technology piece, but also the people piece. If universities are actually going to make a dent in their digital journeys.
That's great. I love your takeaways, Pranay. I think they really summarize what we think are the key points from our research. So from here, I think I'm ready to thank our experts. I really hope that the learnings that we share inspire to start and further your digital transformation journey. And if you'd like to learn more, you can check out the article that is on the BCG website that describes our research. It's titled Higher Ed Must Go All In on Digital. And then you see our emails on the screen. You're more than welcome to contact us for questions or anything more. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of ASU+GSV. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Singh.
Bye-bye.